Hey, everybody.
Hello.
I will start letting people in. Hang on.
Yep.
Hey, Phil.
Hey, I'm back. There we are.
You're back.
Good to see you. I like Camel's Hump behind you. Good background.
I was getting picked on for using a snow background yesterday, so tried to switch it up.
Well, it's how's that go? Winter's coming, right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh boy. All right, I'm letting people in and making them presenters. Denise, if I miss anybody once I start presenting, if you can handle that, that'd be great. Thanks.
I like that you can delegate to me on this call. It's good.
All right, I think we're expecting a couple more folks. Susanna, you're the chair. How long do you want to give people?
We give people nothing. Let's
Nothing.
Wow.
Sounds good.
No, we'll do 1 more minute.
Sounds good. All right.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the AI Council meeting. So for those of you who have access to the chat, you can look at the message just posted that has today's agenda. And for those of you who were not in the loop on this, please also see the chat for a link to our new website that Josiah put together. So this is where you'll be able to go to find information on council meetings and what the council is up to in general. So today we've got a lot on. We're going to start with some updates, then we'll talk about code of ethics, and then do a little bit of substantive stuff, and then a little bit of housekeeping stuff. So let's go ahead and begin. And I'm going to turn it over to the resident expert, who is going to be Josiah. If folks are comfortable sharing in chat throughout the course of the discussion, we are definitely monitoring the chat, so feel free to put comments there as well if you don't want to unmute.
Cool. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna throw some slides on screen, hopefully. See if I can get this working. And I just lost Teams. Let me fix that. There. All right, slides should be appearing momentarily. Can everybody see?
We can see.
Okay, great. All right. So as Susanna just posted in chat, we have an agenda. So I'm going to start with some brief updates on AI usage. We have some housekeeping, and then we'll be going through the rest of these items. So first up, I just wanted to give some quick updates on stuff that's been happening in AI since the last time we met from Vermont's perspective. So I've been having lots of conversations with other states as the director of AI for Vermont, and talking to them about what they're doing in the AI space. Really, a lot of states are looking to us and the code of ethics that we submitted to legislature, the draft that we did early this year, as kind of the blueprints for their own work. So I think New Hampshire recently adopted a very similar version, but we've been talking to Oklahoma and Connecticut and Massachusetts and a number of other states, both regionally and all over the country, about AI and what we're doing here. And people are excited to see what we come up with. One recent development that I personally am very excited about is I have a peer. So Maryland recently brought on a director of ethical AI. I think that's his title. He just started this week. We were chatting yesterday, and I'm really interested to see where he takes AI in Maryland, and we'll be having regular checkpoints to kind of swap notes and see how things are going. Several of our regional states have taken the rollout of generative AI, especially ChatGPT, as a opportunity to just take a pause on the adoption of AI and think about their strategies. Notably, I think Maine and Massachusetts is functionally in that space as well. And so, I've had a few conversations with them about what they're doing. I think they're really, as they near the end of that, looking to put some guidelines in place, a bit like what we've done. I think San Jose is another city that's kind of put some really robust guidelines around the use of generative AI, and we're looking to that as their experience as a bit of a model for us as well. I think one other exciting thing is that AI is actually turning from like a lot of vaporware in products to like being real life stuff. So it's been exciting to see AI roll out in more consumer facing tools and see people get experience with it. The flip side of that is there's a lot of bad ideas circulating about how to use AI. And there's some anti-patterns rolling out. I was talking with a chatbot this morning, and it didn't give me any relevant information about any of the things I wanted. And so I think like that kind of thing is also becoming more and more common. If it's all right, I'd like to flip it over to, I think John Cohn joined, a little bit of a general AI update since last we met, which was several months ago. So John,
and only Josiah, I only saw that request a couple of minutes ago. So,
okay.
I mean, you hit a lot of things. I think it might be very interesting. Can I do just sort of a brief history of AI and how much it's changed? When did we last meet exactly?
I believe it was February-ish. It was 6 months ago, I think.
Wow. Okay, so that's an AI lifetime ago. Let me see. How do I share a screen? I'm just going to put one, if I could, one. Let's see here. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
We can see.
Okay. I think it's really important. So it's been let me start actually with the big thing that. So AI, well, maybe let me start back here. The AI has been about to happen for a long time. And it's very interesting. There's a great piece by Noam Chomsky, the very famous linguist in the New York Times, that was saying, there's a lot of hype around what's going on now. And a lot of it is very cool and new. That cool and new thing has happened several times in the past. And it's been punctuated by, periods, starting from the 1950s, 1970s, 1990s. And more recently, by these sort of hype curve, these minor hype curves, where the expectation of what AI, what AI can do kind of jumps up, and then all of a sudden people realize the limitations of the current technology, whether it was in the past it was rules-based, there was an earlier neural network phase, and this new generative AI is another one of those. This whole idea that these troughs were like in the, everything was incredibly hot on AI in the 1980s, and then the limitations became so clear that it became very hard to get any research money. What I think where we are now, it could be another one of these peaks, because people like Noam Chomsky are saying, don't lose track of what actually is happening with something like ChatGPT. It's not thinking, it is repeating what it has learned or predicting what somebody would expect. And there's no consciousness, he's not even on the path to consciousness. That said, I agree with you, Josiah, that the applicability of these what are called large language models that are built on what are called foundation and transformer models is really fundamentally more useful. I think what is interesting just to sort of frame is that, kind of more concretely, that if you think about the early 1940s and certainly the first time the word artificial intelligence was used in 1951, and the growth of this stuff has been very, very slow until about, and there's been a lot of brute force kind of things, like IBM did Jeopardy, DeepMind has done, AlphaGo, and these are all very mechanical, very sort of bespoke technologies, very hand-coded to do a particular task. But it was in 2017 where a single paper called "Attention is Everything" came out of a paper at Google, and that led to intellectually to a bunch of stuff. And the company OpenAI that started writing these generalized pre-trained transformer models. That is what GPT stands for. And that happened in 2018, 2019. What's interesting is this is a timeline that came out of a talk I saw. And I think it's interesting to point out, Josiah, how much attention is going on in the state. This was a great talk done called "This Changes Everything" at Generator. I'm kind of curious who in the group was able to see it. Josiah, I saw you there. Was anyone else there? Don't know. But this basically is the timeline of AI since November of last year. And we only had one meeting since then. And that was when ChatGPT 3 or 3.5 actually came out. And that was, it was a small project inside OpenAI to take a large pre-trained model, a GPT, generalized pre-trained transformer model, and they decided as an experiment, a friend of mine was actually part of that group, to put it out as a chatbot and see what happened. That happened in November. Then they kept updating the model. And by the time we met last time, February 7th, they had integrated that chatbot because Microsoft, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, personally is involved in OpenAI, and they donated about $1 billion worth of computing. And there's a big ethical question about that, because the environmental impact of $1 billion of computing in terms of the carbon that generates is really something that we need to consider. But in return for that, Microsoft got the ability, early access to the GPT models, GPT-3 and now GPT-4, and integrated that into their search engines. And I don't, Bing is the Microsoft's answer to Google search, and it's always been sort of a stepchild. No one really used Bing before, and Microsoft is making a huge push to try to get back into the search business, because they were the first one to integrate a new large language model in there. And it seems to be working. People are taking it more seriously, and that means that when you go into like Google search, you get back a list of likely places where you would look, whereas Bing now is more like ChatGPT is doing the query for you, and it sort of synthesizes. Of course, the problem of all of those programs, things like Google search or Bing, they are there to help you do searches, but their job is to sell advertising. And I find that I don't know who's using any of the new technology as part of a search engine, and particularly in Bing, but it hasn't been very satisfying to me. Google, of course, is very threatened by this, and they put out their new large language model into their browser, and I think it's probably going to have a better chance of satisfying people because people are used to Google search. But anyway, the whole idea of how this is rolling out in the software community is very interesting. One of the things that OpenAI is doing is it's making a lot of their code available in what's called open source. And as Josiah said, people are able to use it and integrate it into all sorts of things. They built it explicitly with a very, very extensible interface. And that is both a blessing and a curse because it means that technology can be worked into all sorts of things, both good and bad. I guess it's a very exciting time in the research industry. At the same time, during these major hype cycles, a lot of bad ideas get vetted as well. I don't know, Josiah, what kind of other info were you thinking about in terms of how this is?
I think you covered it. Yeah, I was really looking for kind of this timeline and what was new and emerging. So thanks for covering that.
Yeah, I think and there's a lot. I think the very good thing about this, honestly, is that it's bringing up the ethics question as something that's a today problem, not a tomorrow problem. This is not AI that's going to get us towards general AI and taking over the world. This is AI that, in the hands of humans, can sort of amplify humans' best and worst attributes. And I think some of the main things about generative AI in terms of the ability to create content that looks authentic and is not is very much in public consciousness, and it should be. So that's what I'd stop there, I guess.
Thank you. And I appreciate that framing of the previous hype cycle and AI winters. I think that's really important to keep in mind.
And maybe I'd circulate. There's a lot of really good thinking. I listen to a bunch of podcasts on this, and it is, my wife has said to me that this is the first time that I started to have a cautious tone around AI. I think this is a time to be really, for us to lean in as a group and think about what we want to do as a state to sort of rein in some of the bad uses. I never thought I'd be the one saying that, but I've become much more cautious.
Thanks, John. So a couple of other things happening within the state. We did through the Continuous Improvement Network, we offered state employees the opportunity to have some training and some hands-on experience with large language models, ChatGPT specifically. And that was received really well. I think we had, I think it was a bit over 100 folks attended that, and about 60, I think, stayed for the hands-on portion. And that was exciting. So we're continuing to follow up and see what ideas come out of that. Again, there's a mix of ideas, and so we're just monitoring and encouraging people to adopt within the framework, which we're going to talk about shortly. The other thing that I was involved in recently, and Phil, if you're willing to do the elevator pitch on the colloquium, I'd love for you to talk about that for a minute.
Sure. Thank you for that. I don't have slides, but Norwich University received an AI grant from the Department of Education, sponsored by Senator Patrick Leahy. And when we started to look at what we wanted to do, we actually funded a dozen faculty members and about 24 student interns to work on projects, multidisciplinary across the curriculum. And in about 3 weeks ago, we had what we called our Summer of Digital Transformation, brought all the faculty members together, as well as a bunch of other folks across the community, as well as representation. Josiah came. Thank you so much for doing that. And some folks from our delegation and otherwise to listen to the work that the folks had done. Very, very short presentations about this is the work that I worked on, and then great big blocks of time. That's why we called it a colloquium in between, so that folks could talk to each other. And my goal was to get everybody to talk about this, justice studies, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, nursing, human performance, just across the curriculum, as well as cybersecurity, programming, and that sort of stuff, and really be able to engage. And we came away with a whole bunch of folks who were planning on working together, and then models and opportunities to bring this into the curriculum. And I'm hoping that what's going to happen is that We're going to embrace the construct that that ChatGPT exists out there, and the students are going to use it and engage with it, and to provide some understanding that that is what the environment we exist in, and how do we bring this sort of technology into all disciplines across the curriculum. So that was the event to begin with, kind of that ended all of the faculty internships and things. And we've got more stuff working this fall in terms of projects and activities. So we're pretty excited. Actually, the one that I'm an old process control engineer from a million years ago, and I'm looking forward to a couple of students who are looking to create I would call it an expert system around actions and changes that you may take within a control system or operational technology network, and what would be good and bad look like related to that. So I'm going to be involved in that personally this fall. Over.
Thank you. All right. As I was reviewing our prior work with our legal counsel, who she's not able to join us today, but ADS now has legal counsel, she pointed out that the final version of the Code of Ethics was never officially adopted in a meeting, right? We circulated it, but we didn't ever say, yeah, we approve of this in the meeting. So I'd like to do that. That's just retroactive for what we had already submitted. And then I want to talk about what's coming up next. And if the things on the right that we said are the things we're going to work on are still the right things to work on. Yeah. So Susanna, I guess I'll turn this back over to you to do the adoption piece.
All right. So I can't click that. It's somewhere in your life and in your inbox, you have a copy of this document. And so, thank you.
Yep.
And because it has been a little bit of time since our last meeting, it would probably be good for us to do a quick walkthrough of its provisions, just to make sure that we still believe in what it says, that we haven't forgotten anything, and that it still feels current and fresh. So of course it begins with introductory material, including identifying who are the members of the council. It talks about the authority, why we are doing this, give some definitions, a purpose statement, and a scope statement as well. Then it gets into a section about the use of AI and what is viewed as the appropriate and inappropriate uses of AI. I know those are some points that we've had a lot of conversations about. We talked about things like medical information, so that we could use it to do basic health advice, for example, for people who can't get other appointments. We talked about it in a criminal justice context. We talked about it in an education context. Then it goes on to talk a little bit about how systems should be created, how they should be implemented, goes on to discuss conflicts of interest, and then goes on to the more technical piece about what are the basic characteristics of AI systems, which include things like bias and whether sample or input data are reflective or representative of the populations we're looking to serve, transparency and explainability, because it's really creepy when computers do things that we can't figure out how they did that. And then it goes on to talk a little bit about autonomy. At that point, we move on to a section on outcomes that really articulates what is the vision that we have as a state for the use of AI systems, or the outcomes that we want that may be reflected in our decisions not to use it in certain contexts. Things like accountability, trustworthiness, not just trustworthiness of the system itself, but also those of us behind the system. The impact, the fairness, and concerns about discrimination, These are particularly big. As a matter of fact, this morning I was just reading, you know what? You don't need my anecdotes. Let's keep going. Confidentiality, privacy, safety, security. And of course, these are grouped the way that they're grouped. And I'm sure each of us probably would group certain things together or apart. As long as they're, I think, clearly articulated in here, then that's kind of what we're going for. And that appears to be it. So in Josiah's previous slide, he had the side by side that had the summary list on the right. And I'm wondering if we can take a look at that and if it's enough to jog our memories in a way that we can
It's also
decide
right
as a
here.
group whether we're, boom, there you go. Protections for consumers, use of AI by third parties, remedies for harm. These are all, of course, the our future work and our work plan. So this really is an initial step for us. It's a code to which we would be agreeing to adhere while we go forward and do all of the work that we say we're going to do. And these are some of the things that we're going to be looking at. So that's a quick refresher. And I would love to hear from members of the council about whether this feels right still, whether there's anything that's missing from it, or other thoughts.
I'll just say from my perspective, this has held up really well. I know we wrote a lot of this before ChatGPT like hit the news and the explosion that we're seeing now. And I've kept referring back to this as we've been kind of figuring out how we're going to apply different texts. And like I've been pretty happy with how our work has remained relevant, even as the ground underneath us has shifted.
I would agree with you, Josiah, and I think this is a great starting point. And as we work through all these other issues, we might come back and revisit pieces, but this is something that we should move forward so that there is something that is official in terms of an ethics policy. Over.
And I'd echo both what was said. I think this captures it, and I think the underlying principles. I think again, I would be very cautious about being too reactive to any particular innovation. I think that these principles are exactly the right ones. The one thing that, as I hear it, trying to think about these generative models, do we want to be a little bit more forthcoming about honesty in, I think things like generative models like ChatGPT can be very useful for generating text, for written text and stuff. And do we want to say that at least for the state's business, that whenever AI was used to generate copy, that it should be clear that it was used? Or I don't think we want to necessarily restrict the use of it, but I think in terms of people understanding the authenticity, the origin of content, I think that might be one thing that has changed. The idea that people can use programs like ChatGPT to write code. I use it for writing code a lot. I don't know about you, Josiah, but or to write text. And I think people deserve to know that it was used. So is there a transparency? We talk about AI transparency, which says, I want to know how something was calculated and what the data sources were. Do we want to put a little language in there to say that any word products or code products that use generative AI should be noted as such?
That's a great point. I think. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, please continue.
Okay. So yes, I think we should. My suggestion would be, and we're gonna get to this, and I think it's our next topic. My suggestion would be that we pilot that with kind of internal guidance, get some experience with it, and then as we get close to the end of the year, when we're due to release an updated version of this code of ethics, that we decide how we're incorporating it based on what we learn in that internal guidance.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and agree. I do think that we should be notifying people when generative AI is being used to create things like copy. And the other thing that I think is important is the follow-up or the accountability that results from that. So for example, let's say we're using generative AI to create some sort of text copy in a public facing document, and it turns out that maybe the language that's used is harmful to particular groups or is considered offensive or discriminatory or what have you. I would like to know that people have recourse to be able to identify it, let somebody know that that's the case, and then for it to be someone's responsibility to correct it. And if it generated any downstream effects or harm or what have you, that we can somehow account for that. So we don't necessarily have to throw that part of it into a code of ethics, but in terms of just procedures, protocols in general, I think that's going to be an important piece. I'm thinking about some of the legal challenges that have been brought about AI generating things like visual art. And I know you all probably know more about this than I do, but I'm really interested in the idea that if you can't identify a creator, how can we do things like copyright or what have you? And so similarly, I never want a situation where all relevant departments are throwing their hands up saying, well, there's no definitive creator of this copy, so therefore it's not us, you know? So that's kind of where I'm coming from with that. And I also want to highlight in the chat, we have a comment from Amanda about this, saying she agrees with the policy and that as long as we set a defined time period to review it annually or more frequently if necessary.
Chris, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just or just have questions. The ethics policy, assumes that actors within the state are going to be using the technology. It sounds like some other jurisdictions are actually calling for a pause before adoption. And perhaps there are questions around if the technology is adopted and implemented, what are the liabilities to states or other public bodies? And while, I understand it sounds like this is more for sort of iterative process, information gathering, creation of text, or potentially for sounds like coding and things of that nature. So not necessarily sort of external or decision making. But I just wonder if we've sort of fully thought through all of that. And while I think the proposed ethics code should certainly continue to be evaluated, worked on, and considered, I guess the question is just more, should the state or should this body be thinking about recommending to the state along the lines of some other places that, maybe a pause is worthwhile so that we can more fully comprehend all of the implications of adoption, use, and execution of these tools. So I just raise that. I mean, obviously, I'm look at these things from a consumer protection standpoint because that's my job within the AGO. But obviously, the Office of the Attorney General is much larger, and so of course we defend the interests of the state. So if there are liability questions, that might be something that comes up. Would be a good question for Michelle Anderson, maybe, too, for this group. So I'm just flagging it because, I don't pretend to know the answer to that, but I just I may be take a more cautious approach than others on the council or who may be thinking about the exciting possibilities for deployment of these kinds of technologies. So I want to raise that out of an abundance of caution and share that perspective with the group.
I think we'll have deeper conversation about some of that in a little bit here. Yeah, those are great points.
The only other thing I wanted to add was on disclosure. I think, disclosures are great, and that is always a good policy to have. I just wonder in the context of AI, whether folks that are less familiar with the technology and or its uses, when they see the disclosure that something was developed using the tool, will the general public jump to conclusions about what that actually means? And so how do you develop a disclosure that is both effective to educate people, but also not alarming people or fundamentally leading people to believe that something is flawed or not monitored or has adequate human oversight? So there's a balancing act there, and I just wanted to flag that too.
Thank you.
I would just jump in if I could to say that I think that the state has an opportunity to set a tone for that. I think we'd be setting the wrong tone if we said it is wrong to use tools like ChatGPT to help with manual tasks. Just the same sort of thinking was around when hand calculators came out, that everybody was going to stop learning how to use math and stuff. It is possible to cheat on a test if you have a calculator and you're not supposed to. On the other hand, it helps advance science immeasurably. So I think if the state were a good steward of that and said, here's an appropriate use and disclosure, we can set a tone. I don't think we want, and I think we want to reassure people that those technologies can be helpful in certain cases, especially if it's revealed that they're being used. So I don't think we want to be the body that's saying, generative AI is bad, because that really limits the good that it can have. But setting a standard would be really great.
So Susanna, in order to adopt this, I think we need to take a vote. Does that sound right?
I think we need to take a vote. So working group members, John, I see you with a hand.
I just made the comment that I think
Okay.
using disclosure and showing appropriate use is a good thing.
Got you.
Susanna,
All right.
I will make a motion because I believe we need a motion and a second before we can take a vote for it to be binding.
Yep.
So I will make the motion that this code of ethics be adopted by the AI Council, subject to annual review and update.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor, please indicate by raising your virtual hand. And if you cannot, please unmute and let us know. All right. I am seeing 6 working group members, virtual hand raised. You can put those down. Thank you. Any working group members who vote no on this, please indicate by raising a virtual hand or otherwise audibly letting us know.
I'm going to abstain from this vote. I just don't have direction from our front office at this point, so I'm not going to make a representation one way or another about whether we're going to sort of ratify at this point.
All right, thank you. So we don't have any nays. We do have 1 abstention. Are there any other abstentions? Okay. So it appears that we have voted in favor of adopting this ethics model subject to annual review.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Susanna, shall I take the screen share for the next item?
Yes, please.
So, screen share. I'm going to jump over to, for sake of time, and because it was what we were talking about, the use of large language models in generative AI and how we've been thinking about this. So as we've already kind of hinted at, the approach that the AI division has been taking toward generative AI is enabling governance. So trying to give people guidance on how it's safe to use it, and enable them to use it within a box, basically. So the goal is to minimize risk while allowing people to continue to innovate and explore. There's a couple of key points that we've pulled from this code of ethics, as well as other policies that we have within the state. So I'm putting the key points up, and then I'll switch over to a screen share of the actual document, which I believe I think I circulated it before the meeting. So at a high level, right, the user is responsible for what they write. So the rule of thumb here is if you ever say, but the robot said it was okay, you're doing it wrong. So, you know, it's incumbent on the person who's using the tool to review it for accuracy, completeness, and alignment with Vermont values. We highlight specifically that generative AI has demonstrated biases, and it may generate content that's incorrect or just made up. And then we have some general guidelines about how to use it kind of within the usual framework of state policies. Keep your personal work separate from work use. So like, for example, right, there's a lot of folks around who are using it for things like as a rules arbiter for board gaming, right? Like keep that in a private account. You can buy the upgraded version of ChatGPT for that if you want, but use your work account for work, so that those things are separate. Additionally, review your uses with your supervisor. We call out a number of examples of private information, but the general guidance is don't feed generative AI at this point that we don't have any private instances. So don't feed them any private information. Anything that you put in is now in the public, is the assumption. Don't use it in ways that could erode trust in Vermont's institutions. This is straight out of the Code of Ethics about kind of AI broadly, but I think it bears reiterating. There are certain contexts, I think of, there was a school shooting in another state, and they used ChatGPT to write their heartfelt message to the community, and they left the prompt at the bottom. And like, that's like, yeah, there are cases where you're eroding trust in your institution by using the tool. And I think that is a prime example of one of those. And then the other guidance we're providing right now is don't use it as a standard part of your work processes right now. We don't think the tech is quite that mature yet. Treat it as an optional enhancement, treat it as a thing you use to accelerate your work, but expect that you can go back to kind of to use John's example from earlier, right? Go back to not using a calculator, you know, if the calculator goes away because it's having a bad day. So last slide, and then we'll pivot to discussion. After a long conversation with our legal counsel, Michelle, and some other folks, we were trying to figure out, okay, when is it completely unacceptable to use generative AI? When is it okay to use generative AI, but you need to say that you used it? And when, if ever, is it like you can just use it and you don't really have to say anything about it? And I think there's a couple of things at play here, right? One is generative AI, especially looking out over the next few months, is becoming much more baked into products we already use. So right now, Microsoft Word suggests like sentences, right? Using generative AI, it will before too long be suggesting much more than sentences. If you give Microsoft some extra money, you can get that turned on faster. But that's kind of where the tech is going. So as it becomes ubiquitous, both, you know, for today, where do we need this kind of needing to declare usage within the content somewhere? And then as we look out into the future, how do we think that changes? I've kind of plotted this on the left side, going up and down, is kind of how public facing or how broadly the thing is distributed, because I think that that's a key component to consider when we're deciding this. And then across the bottom is like how deeply you're using the tool. So if you're just using it as the grammar checker or just using it in the context of brainstorming, that looks very different from like, I had the robot write it all for me, and then I just like spot checked and edited it, right? Like those are very different use cases. So those are the framing that I wanted to give to this conversation. I will pivot over to the document, but happy to switch back to the slide deck if it's useful to have the conversation. Thanks, Susanna. So for those of you who have gotten a chance to review this, or those of you who just saw what I was talking about, what are your thoughts?
I guess one of the things that comes up for me is I'm looking at the breadth of distribution, and I'm just thinking about how quickly things can expand beyond our intended audience scope. And so if I think that I'm emailing a couple, I mean, I used to work in New York City government, and a lesson that I learned early on there is do not even type it in a draft unless you're comfortable reading it on the front page of the Post. And so the idea is that I hit send on anything and I expect that it could end up in the paper, and I have to be okay with that. And so similarly, I'm just curious about how do we anticipate the actual breadth of distribution, or whether something is going to be publicly discoverable. And I know you kind of mentioned that a little bit, but that's one of the things that's coming up for me is, can we reasonably anticipate that something we think is only open to a closed network will actually remain open to a closed network?
Susanna, as you're posing that, I kind of think that the line kind of between internal and intended for external audiences is somewhere in here. Where do you think that falls? Like, which of these three categories? Should we like never use generative AI in public facing content? Is it in this kind of, we need to make a declaration that we used it and we, it meaningfully represents what we intended, and and we fact checked it? Where do you think?
I think that probably would be appropriate, is just disclosing and confirming that we've verified. I don't know if that means it gets a badge or whatever. Only because, I mean, I can think of one specific example. The last presidential administration had put out this guidance that says anybody who receives federal funding who does DEI trainings is going to be cut off and burned to the ground, or whatever it is they threatened. And I remember writing memos that were internal facing to state leadership, and then also external facing to community members who are actually doing DEI work. And the memos were almost identical, but I was still sending out two different versions just to protect, like privacy of emails, of government, or whatever. So in some senses, that's a document that was almost identical, but sent through two different distribution channels. And so in the case of certain departments that may have very public facing or community oriented communications, I'm wondering how complicated would it be for them to distinguish these different layers if our public and our non-public communications are similar enough that we may be copying and pasting between things. And if this feels like it's in the weeds and overcomplicating, then you all can just feel free to disregard. But this is kind of some of the confusion that I can anticipate may come up.
I know we're running low on time, so I just want to give my quick public health thoughts. I would say the thing that makes me a little bit worried is some of the language of a standard work process. So when I think of what I know other public health departments do this, we do not yet. As much as I've heard is that they want to use, like, the analysts and EPIs might want to use Chat GPT for assistance with code, right? As like that would be a use for it that makes sense. Well, writing code and an analyst is a standard work process that they do every day. So I think it's like, how do we define that of like, no, you can't use it for writing code, even though you do it every day. You know what I guess that's sort of where I'm wondering how that could be a little confusing. If you're like, well, that's an acceptable use, but it can't be part of your standard work process.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe there's a better way to word that. The intent is really view what's currently available as an optional enhancement, right? Like you can do your work without the thing, which is maybe slightly different than maybe those two things are in conflict, and we can work on the wording there a little bit.
I think there might be a, like in medical transcription, for example. Medical transcription is a place where, speech to text has been used for a long time, which is, arguably the simplest form of AI. And that a doctor has to say dictated and read or dictated and not read. I think that in terms of, having the human always be responsible for what he or she has written, I think that all of those things can be used and say, whatever the tool was used in construction of this and was manually reviewed and approved by blah, blah, blah. So I think if we get into a point of saying, here's the provenance of what was done and here's the responsible person, I think if we use that I think it would be a big mistake to say that somebody can't use a tool. I think that we would be disadvantaging ourselves. But I think saying that you have to have a person who takes responsibility visibly for the output. I think that would be a great precedent to require.
Well, I know we are running low on time. I think this is a good start, and I think we'll certainly come back to this later. The other two agenda items that I had wanted to get to today were some discussion about data privacy in AI and, sorry, I'm speeding through these, our January 2024 report. I think in the interest of time, let's table those two for our next meeting. But I think one of the key items that I do want to cover today is picking a regular cadence for these sessions. I know over the summer and then due to the flood, we have been on an extended hiatus, and I think our intent had been for these to be monthly. So just from my side, I would propose that the Friday time blocks that we had been using worked pretty well for me. So we could say, I don't know, first Friday of the month maybe, or something like that. But certainly interested in other people's thoughts on the cadence.
I would be comfortable with a monthly cadence. One of the things that I have found for a couple of other working groups that I'm on is that it's helpful to anticipate the possibility of needing more frequent meetings in the run up to any mandated reporting. So if we do have a January report, we may want to say generally monthly, but maybe for the last month before a report, we may do biweekly or something like that, or just schedule a couple of ad hoc extra ones in case we need it. But otherwise, I think generally monthly is probably fine. And then I guess the other thing that goes alongside that is a lot of times the frequency of meetings can be determined by how much work we're doing outside of meetings and how well we're keeping in touch with each other outside of meetings. So I guess my next question would be, what's our regular communication method? And that might help us determine how often we need FaceTime with each other. And I
Or
know also, I'm sorry, I know I'm talking a lot, but the other thing is that because this is considered a public body, so we can't really be having convos and making decisions by email because then it constitutes a quorum. So there's also that.
Shoshana, I was thinking the same thing. What do you all think about using a tool like Slack or Discord that would be publicly visible so that we can the problem with using email or FaceTime one-on-one kind of things is it doesn't become public record and it's not searchable. Are you all familiar and comfortable with tools like Slack that, you can have threaded conversations, they're persistent and they're visible by anybody?
Can you explain to me? I have used Slack, and I'm comfortable with it, but can you explain to me how that is publicly accessible?
You can make and I need to research this, but I think at a paid level or at a nonprofit level, and we might qualify as both, that you can make a repository that anyone can browse and that only invited people could edit.
Okay.
Or you could actually have, I think there's various sophisticated ways you could actually have places for public comment. But you would have to be a little careful. My experience with these things, you have to be careful. If you leave everything open to writing, you'll get you might get some abuse. But certainly, the advantage is that you get a historical record of all the conversations. You can have private conversations between two people that are not necessarily public. You can have group conversations which might be private, and you can have group conversations, say when we're in quorum, that are publicly viewable. Is that worth looking into? Because I could do a little bit of research.
Yes,
But
please.
I don't want to. My experience also is that when you introduce a new tool that people aren't comfortable with, it doesn't necessarily help. Let me look into it and see what our possibilities are. But I would say we would do that. I think there are many advantages as long as people are willing to kind of learn a new flow. And I understand if they're not, because I think our efficiency is best when we're using tools we know.
I see a couple
Hi.
of folks and, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask if there was, is there any, I would all, I'm just cognizant that, whatever like tech solution we go with for organizing like that has to probably be approved by ADS. And just like, I think there might be some constraints. I don't know if, I would just want to check with our broader team at ADS to make sure that that is something that they're going to approve. Just because I know that Microsoft has like a built-in Slack-like feature that they probably might prefer us to use.
Unfortunately, the secretary is listening into this conversation, so
Oh, okay.
we'll take that back and
Okay,
confirm
great.
that. It's worth looking
Yeah.
into anyway.
I just don't want someone to do too much, John, to do too much research and then come back to find out that ADS maybe prefers us to use a Microsoft solution instead.
I think that's fine, and I'm not partial to any of those. I think it would be great if we could, before I do that, if we could find out if the state has a solution for that. There's also Joe had proposed that we could just use an email with a public archive. The advantage is something that has threaded conversations like Slack, or I think the Microsoft, I don't remember the name of the Microsoft tool, is that you can organize conversations by topic a little easier. But I think if the state already has a preferred solution, that's what we should go with. And if we could find out what that is, that'd be great.
John, go ahead and look at Slack and especially the public facing
Sure.
capabilities. And I'll get with you sometime soon on a final decision from ADS leadership.
Sure. And I think we should be open to whatever they suggest.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know how to actually go about doing the scheduling bit. I guess I can circulate an email after if that's easier. I appreciate the feedback so far though in chat.
Josiah, one quick thing too is that I put a post out. There's going to be a VACE, Vermont Academy of Science and Engineering public talk that Professor Josh Baumgard from UVM is giving on October 10th at Middlebury College. I posted the invite. I think it will be a really good conversation. He's a great speaker. You've seen him, but it'd be great if people in our circle here felt compelled to come. That would be great. in the chat.
Thank you. All right, Susanna, are you amenable to me opening it up for public comment now? And
Yeah.
I'll allow everyone to come off mute. I think I have a way to do that. All right, are there any, I see someone else just joined. Are there, I don't know if I can unmute the phone people. Just a second. Okay.
I just enabled it for you, Josiah.
Thank you. I was just working on that. All right. So I guess if you would like to make a comment, either raise your hand or if you're on the phone, come off mute and we'll call on you.
Josiah, this also is probably a good time just to remind the group that this council does now have a website. Is there contact info in case somebody wants to write us after the fact?
Yeah, there's instruction to reach out to me because I didn't want to volunteer the rest of the council to receive emails or any particular form of communication. But yes, and maybe we'll set up a distribution that goes to this group as well so that people can reach out to the entire group.
Great.
I see that 0271 came off mute. Did you have a comment?
Josiah, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. It's Denise Shakurjan. I'm in a car with Michael Metz. We were able to hear quite a bit. We lost some reception. I just want to take a minute and thank the council for their hard work on this very important topic. I think it's work well undertaken, and I just want to say as a fellow Vermonter, and I really appreciate you guys doing it.
Thank you. Any others? All right, I don't see anyone else off mute, Susanna, so I guess I'll toss it back over to you.
All right, great. So let's just recap a couple of the action items we ended up with. We did table the last couple of agenda items, which include deciding on our approach to our deliverables. And I think that actually might have been it. We did get started setting a recurring schedule. It sounds like we're probably going to stick with Fridays, but you should look out for an email from Josiah afterwards to confirm. We have agreed to monthly meetings with the possibility that we may need more frequent meetings leading up to reporting. We've adopted our ethics, our code of ethics, which is going to be subject to regular review. We've been made aware of a couple of events coming up, including a talk at Middlebury College. And we have also, what did we do? We've talked about the possibility of some kind of tech solution so that we can communicate outside of meetings. What are we missing?
We also tabled the data privacy conversation, but we'll get to that next time.
All right. Working group members, is there anything that has not been said that must be said before we close? All right. Well, you know where to find us. Thank you all. Please look out for your emails afterwards.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.